All right, everybody, welcome to the latest episode of the DRRK podcast. My name is AJ, and before I introduce the rest of my guests, I'd like to maybe direct your attention to that awesome new song you just heard, new fanfare. That was composed for us specifically by Dr. Robinson and Dr. Gray, both board members on the DRRK. Now, Dr. Robinson had some technical notes that he wanted to share, and if you're interested in sort of how the song was composed or made, you can check the description of the video. As for Dr. Gray, she wanted me to sort of direct your attention towards the inspiration they took to make the song. So if you'd noticed, the song had maybe a tempo change, or I don't want to get too technical here, a pace change, and that was supposed to sort of maybe demonstrate the different ebbs and flows of the river. Shout out to our very first episode where a certain gangster explained to us why the river might speed up or slow down depending on the watershed. I think one thing I really was drawn by this song was just sort of the busyness of it. I don't want to say rapid because that's kind of an unfunny joke, but sort of the busyness of the song. It really did make me feel like if you were like, AJ, describe the emotion of a river, I think the song really encapsulates that feeling very well. But let us know what you think. We're really excited to hear what you have to say, and I'm sure Dr. Robinson and Dr. Gray would love some I don't want to say feedback, some praise on that. Yeah. Now, as you just heard everybody there, I'd like to introduce who I'm sitting with today. There's myself, AJ. I am with my co-host Grayson, and then off microphone, we have our editor for this episode. So if there's any problems, blame him, Ricky, and our director for this episode, Shiza, and then we also have a very special guest. I'm going to hand it over to my co-host, Grayson. Grayson, why don't you introduce our guest?
Thank you, AJ. Today, I am honored to be joined by Steve Drew, a board member for the DRRK. Now, Steve Drew has over 40 years of experience in water utility management and municipal government leadership. He began his career with the City of Greensboro NC Water Resources Department in 1979, where he served at all levels of technical and managerial positions until becoming Director of Water Resources in 2011, and later served as Interim Assistant City Manager before retiring from public services in 2020. Steve, a New Jersey native, is a UNCG graduate and an NC Grade A certified water treatment water facility operator. He has extensive experience in drinking water and wastewater utility operations, watershed management, regulatory compliance, general governance, and strategic planning. Now working as a private consultant to public water and wastewater utilities and local governments around the country, he also serves as a volunteer on the Water Advisory Board for the town of Oriental, NC, where he also enjoys inland waterway and offshore coastal sailing.
So, Steve, how did you get to North Carolina, and how did you get to managing our water?
So I got to North Carolina because my dad worked for Western Electric. We know that as AT&T back in the day. And I was in the middle of my senior year of high school in Edison, New Jersey. And I wanted to stay there. I begged him to stay with my best friend and family. Their parents said I could stay. I was going to Rutgers. My dad said, no, you're going to finish high school in Greensboro. And by the way, a tuition in North Carolina is a lot cheaper. So here I am. I'm a product of Greensboro and proud a product of UNCG.
Right on. Well, I think we're happy to have you.
So a question that has been on my mind, and I'm sure a lot of other people who would also like to know this question, where does my water come from? Where does it go? Is it on a well, or is it from the city? Is it from reservoir? What exactly is that sort of process? Where does it come from?
Yeah, so here in Greensboro draws its water from surface water. Primarily, there are 3 man-made drinking water reservoirs. And those reservoirs were built one at a time over the last 70, 80 years. And as we always say in Greensboro, there's not a river that runs through us. Now, we will talk about the Deep River, but the Deep River was never a water source until 15 years ago.
Not that recently.
So, Greensboro's the third largest city. It's pretty tough to be at the third largest city in the state without a very large, voluminous water source.
Right.
So, as Greensboro was growing through the years, especially when we hit the droughts of record back in the late 1990s, we had to find water from other places. So what we did was we created contractual agreements with localities nearby, Reidsville and Burlington and Winston-Salem, because they had capacity to spare. So we ran water lines in each and every direction. So now Greensboro draws water from its neighbors as well. So it makes Greensboro sort of like a regional system because it has pipes going everywhere, not sending water out, but bringing water in, and that offsets the withdrawal from these small reservoirs that we have, which would be Lake Higgins, Lake Brant, and Lake Townsend. And then just 15 years ago, Lake Randleman came online, which is replenished from the Deep River.
Okay.
And did those droughts that you had mentioned before, was that the reason why you all started to have those plans, or were those plans to draw from other water sources, was that already in motion?
So we knew that was a possibility, and we knew that, as the city was growing and demand was increasing, that we were going to have to locate other drinking water sources, that is raw water sources, to bring in either to our own treatment plants or already finished from localities. But yeah, the droughts really caused us to accelerate that. So at that time in the 90s, I was superintendent of the treatment plants, and then a couple years later I became the water supply manager of Greensboro. So I was directly involved in the contractual negotiations and working with engineers to get these cross-country water lines in rather quickly.
That sounds like we're really talking about like city water, and obviously you're city water manager, but how does someone like myself who lives on a well tie into this?
The wells in Guilford County they're not high volume, and so if you live in the county, it's a residential, and the groundwater really does not affect the drinking water that much here. Now, where it does come in, if you're in a prolonged drought, and our watershed, the greater watershed, which is around the Piedmont Triad Regional Airport, so that's the watershed just north of the interstate. So during long periods of drought, the groundwater in the tables can affect somewhat the replenishment of the reservoirs, but primarily the watershed is dependent on rainfall. So there's not too much of a now if you're down east, that's a lot different. So the Castlehane Aquifer is huge, and if there's a prolonged drought there, then you end up with a depletion in what they call a cone of depression. So people then start to have water scarcity problems depending where they are. But that's not the case here. It's a fractured earth thing here, and it's different in low volume.
Okay. Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about the history of water treatment, because something I really don't know anything about. I mean, I know like there was this idea of, people that boiled water were healthier, or maybe even there was like these low alcoholic beers everyone was drinking back in the day. But like, how did we get from that to what we have now?
Yeah. So that's actually a good point of history when you mention beer. Over in Europe, some 400 or 500 years ago, they were figuring out, even though they didn't really know that much about microbial activity and pathogens, they figured out that there were certain dilution ratios of beer and water that, if we drink this, we're not getting sick as often. So there was this correlation, that they made. But fast forward, to our own country and modern drinking water methods, there was an engineer named George Warren Fuller in the Northeast up in New York. I can't remember the city, but he was kind of like the Thomas Edison of water and wastewater treatment, in particular water. And so at the turn of the last century, we did scientists were knowing quite a bit more about pathogens and other microbials that were detrimental to human health. So George Warren Fuller was actually the person who figured out chlorine disinfection. So chlorine disinfection is one of the modern marvels and one of the first things that, turned cities from one way to the other, where people were, regularly getting sick. Heck, even wastewater streams, they were throwing their wastewater from their latrines in the ditch. Well, then the ditch ends up downstream, some source water, which might end up being drinking water. So at least at the very minimum, George Warren Fuller introduced chlorine, figure out what residual that you needed, enough to kill the microbials and the pathogens, but not enough to make us sick and detrimental to human health.
Right. And I did want to ask on that note about sort of that fine mixture of, again, not enough so that it would kill us, but enough that it would kill these pollutants that we have in the water. Can all water really be cleaned? Can it be completely devoid of any and all pathogens or dirt or pollution? Can it truly be that pure?
The closest that we can get to that would be using technology of reverse osmosis, right, or high pressure membranes. And even that is not 100% perfect, but it's probably the closest of any of the treatment methodologies that are available. And then the other thing is the distribution system that carries the water to everybody's homes. And so the health of the distribution system is important as well. So you can have reverse osmosis at the treatment plant, but then you have to take care of the water while it's in transit in the pipelines, getting to your home. So that's another type of chemistry that water purveyors have to pay attention to.
I hadn't even considered that. Maybe that's like a good segue as well. Dr. Gray was talking a little bit about this, of like maybe we don't necessarily want just like pure H2O. Maybe we want some salts and minerals. Is that something maybe you want to?
Yes, minerals are important. Aesthetic quality is certainly important to people. I mean, although, water sometimes can have a little bit of color to it, and it's perfectly safe to drink.
Oh, I never even
perfectly. But is that a hard one to sell to people in the public? It is. It absolutely is. And I know, from Stephanie's studies and with bottled water, there's this sort of urban myth that bottled water is better for you than city water. And, bottled water is in plastic bottles. Plastic bottles degrade. And by the way, most of the water that goes into bottled water that's sold for 1,000 times more than when you pay for city water, it's somebody else's municipal water. They just ran it through another carbon filter, sometimes reverse osmosis. But it's somebody else's municipal water. Aquafina, by the way, is a Coca-Cola product. Where is it bottled? Charlotte Mecklenburg. It's Charlotte water. Charlotte city water.
Wow.
We'll have to run that by the lawyer and make sure we can talk about that.
Want to bleep that one out, right?
So you had talked earlier about the distribution system, and then you just talked about plastic water bottles. What are pipes in Guilford County made of?
Yeah, so pipes in Guilford County are primarily DIP or ductile iron pipe, and then some of the older pipes are cast iron, and those pipes date back to the 1910s and 20s and 30s. And right before I retired, we replaced everything down Walker Avenue and down Spring Garden Street, and those pipes were put in the early 1930s. So when you take a section of that pipe out and you look at it, they're tuberculating, or iron oxide, and so it's all kind of bubbly looking and red, and really the pipes are fine because in terms of water quality, because a sequestering agent is added at the water treatment plants, and then pH and alkalinity is also balanced to make sure that these corrosion inhibitors work. And that what it does is it coats the inside of the pipe. It doesn't emerge in your drinking water at the tap. It coats the inside of the pipe, which keeps these pipes from creating red water, releasing iron and manganese, especially if there was like a fire flow and there was high velocity and it might strip the pipe away.
Right.
It helps to create a protective layer. But the biggest thing is these pipes tuberculate. If that used to be an 8-inch pipe, but it's reduced down to 5.5 inches because of all of this rust. And so that's a primary reason we want to get the pipes out of the ground. Not so much because of water quality, but because it restricts flow. And if all of our water system had to do was carry drinking water to the tap, but not shared with the fire system, our distribution systems would look a whole lot differently, and the pipes would not have to be as large. So that's, so when people get into this interesting debate about municipal water and want to cast upon drinking water, remember it serves two purposes. It provides high quality drinking water to the tap and fire protection.
Interesting. And that's just maybe a cost saving function of why would I run two pipes? Okay.
Right. So we are starting to see across the country, especially in places where water is particularly scarce, for example, Florida and California. So we will actually see water reuse. So they will run actually a separate line for the purpose of irrigation. So it's not, potable for drinking, but it's certainly fine for irrigation. So we're starting to see those systems go in. The only thing is those systems are expensive, and that's why we don't see it in Greensboro, because you charge the customer less for it. So the return on investment is not enough to pay for these systems to go in, even though it's great for conservation and all the right reasons. So then the other side of the water system economically has to subsidize these systems to put them in the ground. So depending on what your community is and what the scarcity is in the region that you live in kind of determines whether you're going to use those technologies. Perhaps Greensboro will one day. We explored it during my time, but not there yet.
Sure. Fair enough. I did have a quick follow-up question. Yeah. You mentioned that right now our water is sort of based on two separate lines one for the fire department and for, or at least they're larger for that sake, for the sake of the fire department and for...
One line for two purposes.
Yes, one line for two purposes. And then in Florida, they're also using a separate reserve line for irrigation.
Correct.
Do you know if there are any other sort of categories that maybe, again, as you probably mentioned, that Greensboro might be able to add on later, or are those really the only main ones that we have uses for?
So another possible source for communities for drinking water to add to its raw water source,
right,
is wastewater.
Oh.
Wastewater effluent. And when we talk about the Deep River, or we talk about being here at the top of the Cape Fear River Basin, Greensboro's water resources do not have anybody else's sewer plant effluent upstream. Okay? So, but everybody else downstream of Greensboro to Wilmington, where the Cape Fear enters the Atlantic Ocean, everybody else has somebody else, another municipality's wastewater, which enters either the Hall, the Deep, or the Cape Fear. So, having said that, with reverse osmosis and other polishing methodologies, it is perfectly conceivable and feasible if a city is facing scarcity, for replenishing and recharging its raw water, to use its wastewater. And so to simply polish and blend it. That very well could be, in Greensboro's future, but not anytime soon, because Lake Randleman, is at least a 50-year supply, but with technology and conservation, even maybe 100 years. But all that to say is, reverse osmosis is certainly coming of age. The prices are coming down. It's still very expensive to put in, and it's very energy intensive to operate. But having said all of that, the drinking water folks will be using it rather quickly to remove these pesky bad actors in unregulated contaminants. And all of that technology and innovation over the years will simply serve to make the whole toilet to tap thing feel a lot better for consumers.
Yeah, right.
Hey everybody, AJ here. I'm just taking a quick pause from this episode with Steve. I think he's doing a great job. I hope you guys are enjoying it. It was a blast to interview with him. But I want to announce the last episode's animal sound. Ricky, cue the drum roll, please. It was a barred owl. Now, for my turkey hunters out there, I hope you've been practicing your barred owl call. As for the rest of you, you should practice barred owl call. It's a cool thing to be able to do at parties, so I've been told. Now, if you guessed owl, I think that's okay. I wasn't very specific on how specific you need to be. But if you were reading the comments, you would have seen that Hannah got it right. And I wanted to say from the entire crew, Hannah, huge shout out from all of us. We're stoked that you got it right. And we're stoked that you're commenting on the videos. We're so happy that you're enjoying our little show here and that you want to engage with us. And I implore the rest of you to comment any questions you might have, your guesses, stuff like that. We really enjoy it. This is not stuff that we just kind of gloss over. It really does mean the world to us. Um, anyway, this is the next animal sound. I'm gonna give you a little warning. Ricky picked it, so do with that as you please. You don't need to be as specific as Barred Owl on this one. All right, cue the animal sound, and then we'll get back to Steve.
So you had mentioned before that there were some bad actors that we're getting out of our systems, these pollutants, these things that are entering our systems that we're using reverse osmosis to get rid of. How exactly would you define those, and are there any that where our focus is on right now that we really want to sort of push out?
Yeah, well, there are two right now that are certainly been in the news or in focus, and they come from different sources. So we've heard of PFAS, which people, the media sort of nicknamed them forever chemicals because they have such a tight bond, and of PFAS, there's PFOS and PFOA, which are long chain compounds, and those are the ones that are usually found in municipal water. And Greensboro in particular, because Greensboro does not have anybody's wastewater effluent upstream, which would have a larger variety of PFAS species in it, it's pretty much PFOS and PFOA. And so, and that's because the watershed, is around the airport area, and there was like legacy firefighting practice over decades and decades, and firefighting foam, one of the components is PFAS. And so a little different for Greensboro to remove it, and perhaps doesn't even have to use reverse osmosis. We can talk about treatment, techniques if you want. That's at some point in the conversation. But if you're downstream somewhere between, downstream of Greensboro and heading on down, and you're pulling drinking water out, you have other people's wastewater effluent. And so wastewater treatment plants, conventional wastewater treatment plants, cannot remove PFAS. So they would even have to consider reverse osmosis as well. But right now the focus is specifically on drinking water, and the EPA has been putting the burden on drinking water. But how does all of this get into a wastewater system, right? So you have industrial users, SIUs, they call them significant industrial users. Greensboro's got about probably over 60 or 70 by now. And they're permitted by the city, manufacturing and other uses, to put their waste into the collection system. Well, the collection system ends up at the headworks of the wastewater treatment plant. So you may have a wide variety of PFAS compounds arriving at a wastewater treatment plant. So that's why Greensboro's drinking water supply is not quite as difficult to deal with as other people who may be downstream of a wastewater plant, since there is none upstream for Greensboro. 1,4-dioxane is another one.
Mm-hmm.
Not dioxin, but 1,4-dioxane. And it's many things, but in particular, it's usually been like a solvent, in the industry, and sometimes a byproduct of other chemicals that are, combined, and so maybe an unintended side effect, but that also can end up in the system. But the difference between the two, PFAS only recently was regulated. For years it had a health advisory. In fact, as little as about 8 years ago, it was 70 parts per trillion. And so now the removal limit, it's still a goal. It's not in law. It's not required removal yet. It doesn't have an MCL. It's an MCLG, but it's 4 parts per trillion. So that's the goal. But water treatment facilities have up to 5 years from last year to have treatment systems put in place. However, with things that have changed at the federal level, EPA, I think that that's been pushed back another 5 years. But Greensboro, Piedmont Tri-Regional Water Authority, most of the large water utilities, they're not part of the problem. They're part of the solution. And these forward-thinking, well-resourced utilities partner with EPA regulators and universities on emerging technologies and research and development. So anyway, Greensboro's got something in place. They've been pilot testing for granular activated carbon. Greensboro had been using powdered activated carbon. And they still do right now until they put in their new GAC system. And what makes Greensboro different than Piedmont Triad Regional Water Authority is Piedmont Triad Regional Water Authority has High Point's Eastside Wastewater Treatment Plant on the Deep River upstream of the lake. So they have a different variety of compounds that they have to deal with, which is why they are now pilot testing high pressure membranes and revert and RNO.
All right. Well, man, so many segues. But I had a quick follow-up on was it SIU?
Mm-hmm.
So substantial industrial users?
Significant industrial users.
Yes. You said they dump their waste into a collection area. Is part of that permitting where maybe they have to report what they're putting in?
Yes, exactly. In fact, they have to get a permit from the city.
Okay.
And the city, because the city knows what it can take and what it can handle in its collection system to the wastewater treatment plant.
Mm-hmm.
But a lot of the contaminants that go in are still yet unregulated. For example, 1,4-dioxane is it's still an unregulated contaminant, and so that's kind of where the challenge lies for municipalities. About setting standards in place in permits where there's not a legal requirement to do so. But most cities have been ratcheting it up now on these things, even though these are unregulated contaminants, and there's like many, many laundry lists of these things, and so they do end up showing up in people's SIU permits for discharge.
Okay. And then on the sort of maybe following up on GAC, I was curious about this. Is it GAC or GAC?
Yeah, granular activated carbon.
Yeah. Okay, so my understanding is we put water that's not fit for drinking through the water treatment system, and part of it is the GAC, the active carbon.
Yes.
And then what do we do with that dirty carbon then?
Yeah, the GAC filters can be the media can be removed, and unfortunately, the media has to usually ending up in a landfill, but it needs to go to a lined landfill. There are technologies that are kind of ramping up right now. It's almost like we're building an airplane while we're flying it. This is kind of what's happening, because we don't have full technology in place to destroy these compounds. So the GAC's going to end up periodically having the media swapped out and changed, and correctly, might say, bound up and packaged, and then taken to a proper landfill. So landfills are also working with in pilot testing ways that they can destroy these PFAS compounds from the leachate at the bottom of the landfill. That's certainly one method. There's ultraviolet light radiation and a number of other technologies that we're starting to see come in place. Now, if you use powdered activated carbon is actually fed into the raw water, where the raw water goes through the granular activated carbon, and of course that GAC adsorbs these synthetic compounds. But powdered activated carbon is sort of a reverse. It goes in, it coagulates when we remove all of the solids in the water treatment plant process. So it ends up in the residuals, or what we call the sludge, from the bottom of the sedimentation basin. And then the sludge ends up at wastewater treatment plant. So how is it dealt with at a wastewater treatment plant? Well, this is sort of a love-hate thing. Greensboro has incinerators to deal with its dewatered sludge. And so one way of destroying PFAS compounds is through high temperatures and incineration. So, it's sort of a double-edged sword in a way, But anyway, but a lot of systems, don't have that. So they have to handle their sludge and residuals differently, at their facilities once, it arrives at their plants.
So we've introduced this idea of other people sort of depending on what we do upstream of this water that will eventually enter into the Atlantic Ocean. How can we, as people of Greensboro, as the people sort of that first line of where this water enters into these pipes, how can we be good stewards to make sure that we're not screwing up the water that goes into those parts that people are living in downstream?
So there's a sort of a two-part answer to that. There's what the water utility and wastewater utility can do, but there's also what can citizens do.
Right.
So when you think about the things that you throw down the toilet, pharmaceuticals, right? Other types of chemicals that that we buy, wash our clothes, or there are alternatives, things that are more ecologically friendly and certainly kinder to wastewater treatment plants. So that's one way. Read labels, know what you're dumping down the drain. And by the way, most law enforcement agencies like Greensboro Police Department, I think Guilford County Sheriff does too, rather than dump your pharmaceuticals down the drain, which are known as endocrine disruptors, don't flush them. Bag them up, and you can either throw them away in the garbage, so it just goes to solid waste, or better yet, you can check with the local police department, because typically they will have a drive to take pharmaceuticals and drugs and things like that. So those are certain things, that citizens can do. It certainly takes the burden off the utility. And in the long run, if we keep facing, if utilities, they're really the end of the line, it's always best to remove things at the source if you can. And because it's very, very expensive from a capital standpoint, and then passing, unfortunately, the cost along to the ratepayers, not taxpayers, but ratepayers. Your water bill pays for all this stuff, and it's expensive. So we don't have to put it in there in the first place, and we shouldn't have to do it. Water utilities also should be certainly mindful of and working with regulators, for what the limits are for their discharge, and not necessarily fight it and be litigious about it. There are a lot of sometimes utilities will look for a legislative solution to say, and reach out, to their legislature and try to get maybe their Department of Environmental Quality or their regulators to back off, right?
Right.
And so that's a political solution. And I've never been one to lean on the political solution. I'm very fortunate to work for a very large progressive utility that was always interested in research and development. So that's really what utilities should be doing as good stewards, is being part of the solution and not maybe adding to a problem that shouldn't exist in the first place.
Right. And I think also before, you did mention that these ratepayers, I believe that we have found on the Greensboro website that they do get statements on their water quality reports on what is actually in their water, percents of certain things, parts per trillion, parts per million.
Right.
Especially on the Deep River and in Greensboro, how should concerned citizens, how should they interpret these reports, and how should they interpret these reports?
Yeah, so water utilities are required to publish the CCR, not Creedence Clearwater Revival.
Right.
You don't know them anyway. But the Consumer Confidence Report. And the consumer confidence reports that are the most successful, because when you look at a bunch of tables of chemical and physical analysis, people are like, you got to be kidding me. All this is in my water, and it's very daunting.
Steve took his glasses off
Yes.
for our listeners to know how stressed he was.
Right. And but the regulators only require, it's basically like a simple one-page mailer, and maybe it might take up 2 pages depending on the font size and the table size, and it can just look very, very dry and very, very nothing, with maybe an introductory paragraph from the water utility and the mayor or something, And lessons have taught us over the last decade or so that if you can do a little bit of better job and take it as an opportunity for science education, if you will, make it somewhat colorful, make it easier to read, and it really goes a long way to telling the story and to help people feel more at ease. But yeah, we water utility folk, when we first were required to publish the CCR, we're like, oh my goodness, this is and it did for a while. I mean, it was terribly upsetting to people because they couldn't believe all of this was in the water. But did you ever read the back of a hot dog wrapper or a can of soup in the grocery store? Well,
Well, you better be careful. We're pretty close to Yum Yums right now. They might hear you on that one.
I just had 2 hot dogs from Yum Yums. So, but yeah, it's
okay. I think we have a final question. Is there anything else you want to talk about before we ask you this final question? Anything you'd like to go over again? Get more in depth with?
No, other than ask your final question, and then sure. I'll have sort of a wrap-up statement for you. How about that?
Perfect. Right. So from what I've gathered so far, you seem pretty positive about the outlook of water. Maybe I misinterpreted you. And our final question is sort of, how concerned should the citizens of Guilford County be with their water?
Well, I think that Greensboro and citizens of Guilford County can take great pride in knowing that their water is not just safe, and doesn't just meet the requirements, but exceeds the requirements. And there are some, because there are some utilities across the country that are either resource poor. Sometimes they may be even in an economically disadvantaged area, and people don't have the ability to pay higher water rates to take care of their systems. But here in the Piedmont region, and not just Greensboro, but most of the utilities here do an excellent job. And so it's all a matter of kind of understanding and trusting what health authorities and clinicians have to say about what our human bodies can assimilate. And that's really what it comes down to. When there are a lot of things in the environment that we regularly ingest anyway, but our bodies can handle it. I think something that people should remember too is the people that are running these utilities I mean, these people are engineers, they're scientists, they're biologists, they're chemists, they're certified wastewater operators. These are professionals that have been using tried and true methods and doing research and development, for the last 100 years or more, since Warren Fuller, And so in that tradition, people in this business are very, very serious about drinking water quality and wanting to make sure that, they're, that it's on par, straight up and good, all of the time. And Greensboro and its neighboring municipal water systems are not poster children for poor water quality at all. They're looked at nationally as first-in-class utilities. So the other thing that I would say that, and the reason I'm involved on DRRK, or the Deep River Riverkeeper Board, is because, again, I care about source water. And I don't just care about it being another drinking water source, but I also care about the biodiversity, in the water system from here all the way to the Cape Fear. And so while that long list of things, of chemical and physical things in these tables and the Consumer Confidence Report are of concern to us, those things and those microdoses, though, are really more of concern to the aquatic life downstream. So that's where it's incredibly important to make sure, especially that our wastewater treatment plants, are staying above, certainly in compliance, but even doing a much better job, because it's so important, the impact that they have. And in most cases, well-run wastewater treatment plants make the receiving streams water quality better. Absolutely do.
I think that's a wrap.
All right.
Something, unless someone else wants to add. Any questions you guys think of while we were talking?
I think you guys covered a bunch of different options that I
Now I'm like, man, we got to talk about biodiversity and aquatic life.
Exactly right. So, for me, I'm sometimes, in the utility world, there's this kind of push-pull, with environmentalists, and most people in my profession, I'm retired from, consider ourselves the first environmentalists in many ways, and I've always partnered with other environmental groups, which is, it seems unusual to see somebody like me, retired from the utility business, on the board of, for an environmental group, and indeed an environmental group that sometimes, may join a lawsuit against somebody else who might be not doing what they should be doing. So, but I've never been that way. I've always, in my public service, I've always tried to form partnerships and to be more than just frenemies. So.
Well, Steve, thank you so much for your time, and thank you for your service.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate it.
Thank you very much, sir.
Very good to be here.
All right. Thank you all for joining us today. We really hope you can tune in to future episodes. Each of our episodes will include show notes with citations to anything we've referenced. You can also refer to the show notes if you're interested in reaching out to us, if you're interested in making a donation, or if you'd like to find information about local river organizations where you live. Thank you all for listening, and remember, the river is us, and we are the river.